shut the doors? Sorry.
Edit that part out. Everyone else can wait. Okay, good morning, everyone. I am Brian Cortijo. Welcome to Do Not Pass, Go. I'm not going to repeat the description of the event, but we're going to be talking about our experiences as persons of color in the gaming industry. And I'm planning on being really honest insofar as my legal agreements allow me to be.
Yeah.
I'm going to introduce yourself.
I'm Bebo. I own a company called Bebo Games. I make YouTube videos teaching people how to play games, and I also wrote a book called the Everything Tabletop Games series, but I also consult on a lot of things in the game industry.
And as I mentioned, I'm Brian Cortijo. I am a part-time freelancer in the tabletop role-playing game industry. I've worked on Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Blue Rose, working on a project right now that I can't talk about because I'm under NDA. I am what I call a full-time part-timer, which means I am always part-time, but part-time isn't really part-time in what I do. And I am also what I call a part-time person of color. Because I am a white passing Latino, I am Puerto Rican on my father's side, I am Jewish on my mother's side, I am or am not a person of color depending on who I'm talking to, when I'm talking to them, when it's convenient for them to consider me a person of color, when it's convenient for them not to consider me a person of color, which quota they want to fill, which opinion they want to hear, which opinion they don't want to hear. And that has affected me in a lot of my interactions, both professionally and personally, which is kind of why I wanted to do this panel to begin with, because I think when it's easy for someone to put you in a box, they'll do so. When it's harder for someone to put you in a box, they resent you for it. And I'm, as I mentioned, half Puerto Rican and half Jewish, and so I'm a loud, opinionated person. I share my opinions. I talk a lot with my hands. That's why I'm doing this, so I don't smack the microphones. And sometimes that can create some tension, because I've been at this for long enough that I can tell when I'm being treated professionally and when I'm not. And so I sometimes I get myself into trouble. Just a little bit about my background in the industry. I've been freelancing since 2003. I mentioned the games I've worked on, but I generally only do one or two projects a year. So even though I've been doing this for now almost 17 years, I only have just shy of 50 credits to my name. Some of them are small, some of them are quite large. But because I've been doing it for so long and I'm friendly with so many people in the industry, I'm also asked to do a lot of behind the scenes work. What's called lore checking, so working on the background history and internal consistency of the worlds that I work on. And because I'm a fan as well as a freelancer, a lot of that work is unpaid, which is the resentment for that is exacerbated because I'm a person of color. But there are plenty of white people in the same position that I am that also don't get paid for the same work. So I don't think it's because I'm a person of color. I'm going to let you talk for a minute.
Okay.
I was going to go down a bad road.
So I'm in like a totally different situation, I think, in that I work on dozens of projects every single month. I started my company about 2 years ago, and outside of saying like, hey, I need work at events I'm going to so I can make up the cost of going, I've never really solicited work because I established myself in an industry as somebody who is fairly well known. And I think that part of that is that I'm Mexican. My family is from Juarez. And I've been loud about this, about my experiences and honestly like mistreatment, and also, gosh, the board game industry is like really, really sparse on people of color. And so like people will be like, hey, I wanted to know if you could do a diversity consult. And I'm like, sure. And they're like, so what do you think about these black characters? And I'm like, I'm not black. you should probably consult a flag person about that. And that experience has been really all over the place because I've been vocal about, where I stand on certain things, and as a result of that, white people don't necessarily know who to turn to when they're like, well, there's like 7 people of color that I know that work in the game industry, and I'm like, that does not mean you can come to me for everything. Here's some contact information for somebody that like is better suited for this. And I do think we're getting better about it. But I definitely feel like one of the things that I run into, opposite of you, is that like I don't work for free. Like I'm like, no, if you're working with me, you're paying me, end of story. But I do really hate finding out that other people are doing essentially the same work as me and they're getting paid 4 times as much as me, and I'm like, how do we fix this problem? And I've seen people like DC and other folks in the industry who have said, this is the minimum rate that we're going to charge for this thing, and they made a spreadsheet and they sent it out to a large group of POC, that way they could help them establish themselves and not undercut a bunch of other people. And it really did help everybody get to that level and say like, hey, this is this type of work, therefore we need to be charging X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, and I really admire the work that DC is doing, both in the industry, and I told you it was going to happen. Both in the industry and specifically what they're doing now at Wizards, because they got a contract to work over Wizards, which is awesome. Because I actually got to visit Wizards of the Coast yesterday. The stuff that they're doing on the narrative side is going to improve things. There's a couple of folks over there that are working on making things better. But as someone that's been so just full disclosure, one of the things I do is I'm what I call a lore monkey for the Forgotten Realms. I work with a number of the authors and sometimes the designers, although the designers are discouraged from seeking outside help, in keeping the world straight in terms of making sure that the things that they talk about naturally grow out of the things that they've written about in the past.
But you're working with Wizards?
No, I'm not working with Wizards. And that's
okay,
the problem.
I was going to say you need to make it gay.
Yeah.
I was making a joke because magic and then being straight, and you said keep it straight, and I was like, don't keep it straight.
No. Although, to be fair, I am a cis-het white passing POC, so my privilege levels are way up here, and that also creates issues for me, because if I complain about my situation, the number of people and the categories of people that have it worse than me are huge. But when I do the things that I do, it's not, okay, here's a big pile of text, please check it. It's, oh, do you remember when this happened or what book this is in? And because I have a fairly encyclopedic knowledge, I'm able to respond to that in a 1 or 2 sentence email. And the people that are reaching out to me are friends, and they're other freelancers, and they're people that aren't inside the company. So it's difficult for me to say, I need to charge you for this work. It's also difficult to price that work because, like a lot of people, I was a fan before I was a freelancer.
So you somehow retain all of that information in your head just chilling?
Yeah, I kind of do.
Oh God.
Yeah, I have that kind of brain. Lucky me, I guess.
My head is full of like terrible 1990s country music. Like, it's really hard to purge.
Yeah, I'll take the royal line of Cormier over. It can break your heart anytime.
Only women country music, not it can break your heart.
Fair enough. But because I've been doing this for so long, one of the things that frustrates me is that when I started, rates were about 5 to 7 cents a word as a freelance game writer. Now, when I say writer, I mean writer, not designer, because people who design games are making games from scratch. People who write for games as freelancers are working on other people's systems, and those are different jobs. The job that I do is a lot easier than the job that designers do. I'm not an in-house person. I'm not creating systems from the bottom up. But now, even now, rates have not fundamentally changed since I started in 2003. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Publishing costs continue to go up. but sale prices don't go up. And so companies can't afford to pay their people more. But also, if I decide not to work, there's 10 people behind me that are willing to take that job for half of what I'll take it for, easily. Because in tabletop, role-playing game, freelance, in that world, there's a lot of people who can do the job at the basic fundamental, C- level. Anybody can put words on a page. Now, I'm not at a C- level, I hope. And I think both my experience and my products speak to that. But, as someone who doesn't do my job for the money, because I have a full-time job that gives me great benefits and a pension and an okay salary, but I don't live off my game writing. I can sort of afford to take less than I think I'm worth for the things that I do. But by the same token, I know I can never do this full time. I can never afford to do what I do as a profession.
I can't afford it, I just do anyway.
To speak to that point, I think, and this is my personal experience, I don't know if it maps to anyone else. As I grew up and I still live in New York City. And so,
okay, that changes things.
Yeah, it changes a lot of things. But also, I grew up around a lot of people of color who had to grind all the time to make ends meet. Mm-hmm. And, but in my household, my mother was a teacher who had a job that resulted in a pension. And we were a union house. So I grew up, and the lessons that I learned was you get a steady job that has job protections, that has benefits, that has a pension if you can get it, and that's your priority. You take care of your family first. You can worry about your dreams after, but if you're secure, then you have the freedom to do that. And luckily enough, I got that union job with the pension and good benefits, and I have that job, and I'm not going to leave that job. But I can't come out to Seattle and start hitting up the game companies that have full-time work and say, hey, I want this job. I can't move my wife and my children across the country to work in a market that is just as expensive as New York City now and give up those things. And I think part of my anxiety over that is due to the fact that I'm a person of color, and I feel less secure with those jobs in the first place. But part of it is knowing that as a person of color in the United States, I have to protect my family. I have to make sure that my kids are going to eat, that we're going to have a nice-ish place to live, that when I retire, my wife and I will be able to continue to support ourselves. And as when I say that full-time, part-time freelancer thing, that's where I fall. I'm locked in where I am. I can get a better job doing kind of what I do for a different college in the university that I work for example, or I can move up, but I can't move out. But the reasons I can't move out aren't just based on the job that I have, but the job that I would really like to do, which is this. I'd love to do this all the time. There's no money in this for me, for what I do.
Polyamory. So for me, honestly, what I do for a living is not, I don't make nearly as much as I would like to make ends meet, but literally polyamory. I have a wife and a boyfriend, and my best friend from high school also lives with me, and they help a lot, and I really can't stress this enough. Anybody who's working full-time in the tabletop games industry who does not own a company likely has a massive support system around them with some level of security. And if you don't have that, I don't recommend making the jump. For me, my wife has a very secure job at Whole Foods, and so we have medical insurance that way. That was we'd been living together for several years, but it was one of the contributing factors where we were maybe it's time to get married. We've been living together for a couple of years, and you are this other parent to my child, and we were really happy. And then I decided to buy a house, and I was I really want you, if you're paying into the house, to have some level of ownership over this. And I was okay, well, then let's do this. And you have your security your way, and you were taught that. My mom mom worked at Costco my entire life. I'm going to have to take care of her when she gets older. And like, there is no financial security for her. And I've never experienced any level of financial security in my life, ever. So for me, it was just like, oh, and I got pregnant when I was 19. And the dad was like gone. And so, you know, without ever experiencing that, I just instead seeked community. And that was the big thing, is that I wanted to get out there. I wanted to make friends. I wanted to build stable relationships. I've known my wife for, gosh, like 6 years now. And my boyfriend I've known for 9 years. And it's just one of those things where if I can't get the typical security, because I wasn't able to go to college. I had like absurdly racist teachers who like just were like, no, straight up, you are not getting this scholarship money from kids that deserve it because you're Mexican. Like, it was a wild ride. I went to a high school in Tumwater, Washington, which is just outside of Olympia, and there were like literally 6 trucks in the parking lot of our high school that just had Confederate flags on them. Like, every time there was a lockdown, it was because the white kids came to school to kill the Muslim kids. Like, it was a wild, wild ride. And being a white passing-ish person of color in that environment was actually really wild for me, because in middle school, I spent every summer in Palm Springs, California with my grandma. Or I was at New Mexico State University with my aunt. And so I would come back and I would be dark. And I was treated very differently during that time. And then at some point, I was tired of being treated like garbage, and so I just said, well, I'm just going to stay inside and play video games because I'm like exhausted by all of this. So that's the story of why I look white now. But I noticed a dramatically different way that people treated me as I like became fairer skinned, which was a really like shocking, jarring experience for me as like a 12 to 14-year-old little girl.
Yeah, that's actually funny, because I have a similar experience. When I was in high school, I lived in Brooklyn, so the high school I went to was very mixed. You know, there were people of every possible background, speaking every possible language.
I was one of 2 Latino kids in my whole school.
And so I would come, like you, I would go elsewhere for the summer, and I would come back darker.
Right.
Now, not dark, but dark enough
for them to notice.
For people to notice. And as the school year would go on, the people that would approach me speaking their non-English native language would change based on where they thought I was from. So it would be the Dominican kids, and then it would be the kids from Arabic-speaking countries, and then they'd move around the Mediterranean. It was really interesting to me, and you know, there were 3,000 kids in my school, so I didn't know everybody. It was a large enough school that people didn't know who I was that weren't in my circles of friends. So this would repeat every year for 4 years. And I don't know enough Spanish to converse in Spanish, so even the people approaching me speaking in Spanish, I'd have to apologize that I couldn't continue the conversation.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, it's it's interesting because I kind of look like everybody, depending on what my skin looks like that week. But on the other hand, it's frustrating because I wasn't raised speaking Spanish. I didn't retain a lot of the Spanish that I learned academically in high school. And, that divorced me from, I think, a lot of relationships that I could have had with people that were, of my people. Now, of course, being of Latin descent, my people is a very broad stretch of people. And everybody's got their own, kind of background and their own ways of speaking. And, Mexican Spanish is different from Puerto Rican Spanish, is different from Cuban Spanish, and all that other stuff. And God forbid you speak to someone who's actually from Spain, they have no idea what you're talking about. But that's a hard thing to do, to feel separated from your own people. I mean, at the same time.
The other Latinx kid in my school was actually my best friend, Charisse, and we've been friends for 15 years. She lives with me. She's half black, half Puerto Rican, and I'm Mexican. We met in high school, and when we go places together, people would come up to me and speak Spanish, and I would be like, talk to her, and they would literally walk away. They would look at this black girl and be like, And I'm like, I swear she's super fluent in Spanish, like talk to her, I promise. And that was a consistent issue that we have, mostly up in Seattle. This wasn't back in where we were from because nobody spoke Spanish in Olympia.
No, it's funny because, you know, being Puerto Rican, my grandmother, if she were in the room, she would have been by many, many shades the darkest person in the room if you were in the room right now. She passed when I was young, but and you know, she was an Afro-Latina. She was a black Puerto Rican woman, the kind of woman that other Puerto Ricans would walk up to and call her negra. Like, she was black. And you know, I'm not. I didn't get the melanin. But even the colorism inside the Latin community is absurd. You know, because we're every shade, we're every color. It's funny and frustrating at the same time because you know, you wanna at least feel at home among the people that talk like you and eat like you and dance like you and all those other things, and sometimes you can't.
When we went to back home in Juarez for the holidays and stuff, my brother and my cousins were allowed to run around. They were like, "Not you. You look way too white. We're not letting you go anywhere. Like, you have to stay by a parent at all times." Were they afraid you were going to get kidnapped? Yeah. Even though I had dark hair and dark eyes, like, they were like,
The little white girl's going to get snatched.
Yeah, that was their take. And it was scary for me.
That's scary.
I was like,
That's
I'm
frightening.
7 years old. Leave me alone.
Yeah. You know, to bring the discussion back to, you know, gaming, I don't want anyone to sit here thinking that I'm coming here saying that I've been actively discriminated against as a person of color in tabletop games. I have not, that I'm aware of anyway. Part of it, I think, is because I'm a white passing, cisgender, heterosexual male. And so I check at least most of the boxes for the old boys club. But one of the things I found over the years in my segment of the industry, and you know, the role-playing side is such a small segment of the overall tabletop industry. In my segment, I find that there's very little chance for mentorship for new freelancers. And while I can't prove it, it seems to me that now, as awareness of the paucity of persons of color in the gaming industry is becoming more prevalent, people are seeing that, you know, the skin tones are basically the same. There are a lot of opportunities coming up for people that don't have a lot of experience and don't have any guidance. And my fear is that there are going to be companies that give opportunities to people who aren't ready to embrace those opportunities without some kind of help, and are going to take those opportunities anyway because they're the only ones available to them, and are going to, I don't want to say blow their shot because that implies that it's the fault of the freelancer. They're going to fail in a way that they can't recover from, at least with that company. Because right now, because so many RPG companies operate on such a narrow margin, they can't afford to have someone hold your hand and bring you through the process and say, this is what you need to know to succeed with us, and this is what you need to know to succeed with other companies. This is how you handle a problem if you're having an issue with a deadline. This is how you handle a rude feedback from someone that's editing your manuscript. This is how you remain professional even if you're having issues. And for new freelancers, in RPG writing, that stuff is terrifying. When you make a mistake, and everybody makes mistakes. Nobody's a perfect freelancer. I'm certainly not a perfect freelancer. I was telling one of the companies I work for just last night, I've turned in stuff late, I've turned in stuff bad, I've turned in stuff bad and late. But I never had anyone say to me, this is how you handle that. This is how you deal with that, until after the fact.
I still don't know. I fail all the time.
And failing is okay. Failing is part of the process. Failing is part of being human. But I think that as a person of color, I feel like I'm in an area where there's very few people of color. I feel like I'm always having to be a standard bearer and a vanguard, and if I screw up, I'm not just screwing up for me. And right now I feel like there's a lot of people being put in that same position that are going to screw it up for the rest of us. And you know, as a freelancer, you don't need that kind of pressure. You don't need that kind of weight. You don't need that responsibility for someone else's career coming in with you. You just want to do your job and do it well so that you get the next gig. And I'm terrified for all the people that are just coming in now. I mean, I'm 39 years old. I've been doing this 16, 17 years. And I don't need this to eat. Thank God. This is not my profession. But there are people that are doing this, and they're preparing to make this their life. They're preparing to make this what they do for the next 20 or 30 years. Mm-hmm. And first of all, the number of people who can freelance full-time for 20 or 30 years, I can count on one hand. And usually it's the middle finger first, because I think Nicole knows who I'm talking about. There's not a lot of people who can do it, and it's tremendously taxing on the psyche. It's really hard. There are people that need to take breaks, and when I say breaks, I don't mean like a week or two, I mean like a year or two. But to add the additional pressure of possibly messing up the opportunity for someone coming behind you is a lot of pressure. I wrote online once that, you know, with the length of time that I've been doing this, and the profile of some of the projects that I've worked on. You know, I worked on the Sword Coast Adventures Guide for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. That's a hugely high profile product. You know, I was the only person of color on that product that I could recognize from the list of people that worked on it, and that's both at Green Ronin and Wizards of the Coast. I would expect by now, after almost 20 years of doing this, that there would be more people in my wake that could do some of the things full-time that I can't do, that would be given opportunities that I didn't get. And it hasn't happened. And that's the heartbreaking part about it, is that I don't know. First of all, I don't know if it's because I was such a bad freelancer sometimes, or I don't know if it's because the companies are not seeing the people out there that have these talents, or if people are not getting the kind of mentorship that they need at the lower levels to raise to the level of being visible to larger companies to get those opportunities. I don't know what it is. I think it's all of those things.
I mean, I also think it's a huge lack of accessibility, right? Like, growing up, the only reason why I had access to games in the first place is that my white grandmother was a high school teacher, and she loved games. She loved like cribbage and things like that, and she got me interested in that. And then after I had my daughter, I started playing the World of Warcraft trading card game because a guy I was dating gave me a deck, and I was like, oh, well, I really like the Pokemon trading card game, so let's start playing this. And then I started playing in Seattle. I ended up moving to Seattle because of the World of Warcraft trading card game, because I was like, wow, there's a community here and I really like this. Then they killed it 6 months later and my heart was broken, but I was already living in Seattle, and the big thing was I met a bunch of other board gamers, and they were like, hey, I have this huge game collection because I have money. Do you want to come over and play board games? So I suddenly had access. I had access to tabletop games, and I was an insurance agent at the time, and I would have never had access to games if it weren't for the fact that I had made friends in Seattle. And that gave me access, and then I ended up getting a job in the tabletop game industry because I was an insurance agent and somebody needed a business-to-business and business-to-consumer marketing person, and I was the perfect fit. And I was demoing a game that I absolutely hated. It was essentially Cards Against Humanity, but it was a reskin at a convention. I was just like, this is the worst and I hate it, but I did a great job. I sold every single copy at PAX, and those people were the ones that recommended me for this other job that got me my first step into the tabletop gaming industry. That job was a job. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, I was able to make a name for myself, and now I can do my work on my own and have my own, freelance-y sort of game company. I don't think that without access in the first place that I could have accomplished any of that. And so one of the biggest things that I think as a community we could do to make games more accessible is get them into libraries and teach them One of my huge initiatives that I want to do with Be Bold Games at some point is get care packages with 5 games in them, and then make how to play videos that are really quick and easy, and then ship those care packages to schools and libraries and community centers and retirement homes, like wherever I can get them out there, because I feel like the biggest barrier to entry is just access. Like, how are you going to be inspired to make your own games if you don't have access to new games in the first place?
Yeah. Speaking of that, I actually had that conversation about libraries at Gen Con 2016. I was speaking to Paizo after hours, like some of the folks from Paizo, and I said, you know, there are people that can't afford games, that just can't afford them, but they want to play them, and you need to get them into libraries. And like, oh, we send copies of the core rulebooks to libraries all the time. I said, it's not about the core rulebook. You have a beginner's kit, you have a starter set, and you have people, you have an organized play apparatus in every major city. There is no excuse for you not to have someone go to a library with a beginner's kit and run a demo game.
Yeah, you need to like schedule events.
Yeah, I think, you know, because sending product is marketing. It's part of your marketing budget for a company. If you're sending product somewhere for free, you've built that into your cost. But, and so whether you're sending that to a library or to a reviewer or whomever else, you know that copy's gone. Mm-hmm. But taking the effort to engage people who wouldn't otherwise have access to your game, mm-hmm. Creates customers, and it creates that access that you're talking about. I think you're absolutely right about that.
The best marketing you can do at the end of the day is word of mouth. Mm-hmm. Like with the World of Warcraft trading card game, like I loved that game so much. I don't think I ever talked to anybody for like the entire couple years that I was playing it and didn't bring up like, hey, you want to play this game with me? Which now it's Hearthstone. They killed it to make Hearthstone, and I'm also still obsessed with that. So I don't know. Word of mouth is
okay.
really.
You're okay. Like, you got a game. You mentioned something about, you know, it was a job, and I think, raise your hand if you're a freelancer in the industry. Okay, so the particular freelancer who raised her hand is probably not going to be in this situation, but if you ever decide to do freelance work, you may be put in a position where something's going to make you uncomfortable. I know I've had stuff that's made me uncomfortable. And the whole reason I wanted to do this particular conversation, mm-hmm. and the reason I named it what I did, it took me 2 days to come up with the name for this panel, and then it smacked me in the face. I spent a lot of years passing, not on purpose, but passing in this industry. People assuming that I was white, that I was some kind of weird Italian, that somehow I was misspelling my own name. It didn't occur to people that I was a person of color a lot of the time. And at a certain point, I think it was just after I turned 35 or 36, I decided I wasn't going to pass anymore, that I was going to be as loud as I could about the fact that I'm a person of color. Because I know I do good work, because people still pay me to do work. Even if I turn them down because they're either not paying enough or it doesn't fit my schedule, people still ask me to do work. It's not all the time. I must be doing something right. And now there's an opportunity for people of color in the industry to make ourselves seen and make the quality that we can produce seen. Mm-hmm. And to show that we don't just bring talent, but we bring something additional in terms of our experience and our perspective, mm-hmm. to an industry that for decades has not had that perspective. And so I'm not going to pass anymore. And so I've got to be loud about it. And I'm well aware that being loud about it is going to cost me certain specific opportunities with particular people. I don't really care. Yeah. Those are people I wouldn't want to work with anyway.
Well, and there's a lot of insecurity that comes with it too, to be honest. Like, I know at the end of the day that even though I'm confident in the work that I produce, and I know that the product that I produce is unique, and I have a unique perspective, there are still, you know, other people out there who have a lot more money than me. And that just means that, like, oh, your camera is like 7 times better than mine, and your production value is like 10 times better than mine, and I don't look like I'm filming a commercial because my, you know, partner's not a professional video producer. Like, I don't even have a cameraman. I'm filming this with me and a tripod. And you have to accept that like that your perspective is still needed and it's necessary, and it's important to constantly remind yourself that just because other people have more money and more access, that your voice is still important. Because that is one of the biggest challenges that I face every single day of my life. I'm like, oh, look at this other video, it looks so much better than my videos, how am I ever going to compete with that? And all I have to do to keep myself going is just say, like, is the thing that you produced better than the last thing that you produced? Am I always improving? Because I'm not here to compete with other people. I need to compete with my last set of work. Am I improving? Am I doing better than I was last week? Did I learn something in the process of making this? And that's a really difficult thing, because as a freelancer, it's hard to carve out time to level up, I should say. It's really, really difficult to justify the time that you would spend learning a new skill to improve and move on to the next thing, especially without the mentorship that you're talking about. Like, I started my company, I've been completely on my own. And it's scary and it's hard. And there isn't really mentorship out there as far as I can tell. And people are like, oh, would you be interested in mentoring somebody? And I'm like, with what time? Like, I'm just trying to put food on my table. I can barely afford to keep the roof over my head.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. I think, in particular, you know, when you're freelance writing, unless, if you're asked to do, so you may or may not be asked to do a revision, you know. Revisions are built into a lot of contracts, but some companies prefer to do the revision in-house. Some companies prefer to redline and send back to their authors. If you're given a redline document, you're not going to get a lot of explanation, because the person that's doing it is trying to get through your manuscript and everybody else's manuscript that's working on the same project.
Sometimes they use all caps and it feels really mean.
Yes, sometimes they'll yell at you and not mean to be yelling at you, but you have to get it done and get it back, because you have a limited amount of time. And you don't have the time for the back and forth that mentorship and guidance and teaching requires. On the flip side, if you don't get a red line back, you might never get any feedback from the person that edited your manuscript, ever. And so that goes to print, it goes to customers. They may have completely changed what you wrote and you have no idea. Oh, chapter 2 on equipment sucked. And you wrote chapter 2 and you find out that they changed everything, or you find out that they changed one little thing and you're like, but that changes the whole tone. But there's no time for dialogue. And I think that speaks to the state of the industry as a whole. I mean, that's certainly not a POC problem. That's an everybody problem. Yeah. Sorry. But I find that for those of us when we're getting started and need that kind of feedback and need that kind of back and forth, we're never told that that's not what we're going to get. We're never told that that's not what's going to happen. And so you think, well, I did a terrible job, I didn't get any feedback. And then by the time the product comes out, you might be on your next project already, and you haven't learned the thing that you needed to learn to make that second project better than the first project.
That's fair. I mean, I think that in the process of writing my book, I learned two things. The first thing I learned is that your editor's not really going to do as much as you think. They're literally going to take whatever you produce and they're just going to like fix it. And I was like, oh, I was really expecting a lot more direction than that. And then the second thing I learned is no matter how much you want to use they, them pronouns, your editor's going to get more and more angry as they go through and correct every single one through all 83,000 words and switch it to he or she. And I was like, oh.
That's rough. That's not okay.
No, I was working with a very large publisher.
Okay.
I was working with Simon & Schuster, and so it was a book publisher, and I understand where they were coming from, but I was just like, oh, I think I upset this person. Like, that's 83,000 words, and they had to go through and change every single day. And sometimes it didn't make sense, and I had to go back in, and I was like, no, I actually meant multiple people.
Then they find and replaced. If it was every single instance, then they did find and replace. That's
what I was thinking, per chapter, I think, because every other chapter was he, she.
Okay. It's frustrating when you try and assault the gender binary and the gender binary is like, no.
I tried, and I don't fault them because they're a big, they're a big book publisher, right? They're not in tabletop gaming. They don't know our current issues, and I like understood and respected that. But it was very funny seeing them start out like, okay, this edit's like, okay, I changed this, and then like it gets aggressive and more aggressive as the book goes on, and I'm like, oh, you're sick of me. I get it. It's cool.
Yeah, but like those kinds of things, that could have been fixed with an email rather than find and replace. You know, your editor could have contacted you and said, look.
Oh, I had a panic attack meltdown and contacted them, and they were like, it's okay, and like head patted me.
Oh.
So they're great.
Okay.
No, they're really great. And I was like, thank you for explaining this to me. But you're right. But that's just it, is that I think that that's just as a whole, like they don't really understand how to set our expectations if we've never done this before.
Sure.
Maybe we can help with that.
Maybe. But I think, you know, I'm fortunate enough in my history, you know, I've worked for, with the exception of Fantasy Flight, which is, it's ironic that I'm saying this now, with the exception of Fantasy Flight, I've worked for most of the major RPG publishers. And so I've had the opportunity to deal with people who are very professional, but also who expect really seasoned freelancers. And sometimes they expect someone so seasoned that they don't give any feedback. And so, you know, I always feel like I could always have been better earlier if I had gotten more meaningful feedback without having to figure it out myself. You know, a lot of the feedback that I've gotten has not been direct feedback, but indirect feedback by looking at what actually made it to print versus what I turned over, and kind of, okay, I see what they changed here, and I can kind of understand why they changed it. And sometimes it's stuff that I disagree vehemently with, but those are more lore questions than kind of writing decision questions. And because I consider myself an expert on the worlds I write on, you know, I was like, no, you can't actually make that change. And I actually had a fight with one of my editors once, but that's a different story. That's under NDA, so I can't talk about it. But I really feel, and I'm sorry if I keep going back to this, I really feel like the lack of mentorship, the lack of guidance, in particular for people that really need it, because they didn't come up knowing people in the industry. They, you know, they have a talent and they have a passion, and they got the gig, but they don't know what to do with it other than pound out the words. That lack of hand-holding, even for people that are so talented you think they don't need it.
They do. Everybody
who's new needs a teacher, and I think that's the great loss of where the industry stands right now, is that there are so many people that are coming in that need that help and no one to provide it. And
well, it's hard to make time.
Absolutely.
Sharice moved in with me, and I was like, oh good, I can mentor you in being in YouTube videos now because we have the time, because like, I don't know, I can talk to you while I'm sitting on the toilet. Like literally that's the kind of like, that's how much time I have in a day.
You make time where you can. So yeah, I think I've talked without questions enough. People kind of know where I stand on this stuff. Before we open it up to the audience, do you have any questions for me? I don't think you do, but I'll ask you.
I don't think I do.
I don't have any for you. I just figured.
I want them to ask us questions.
Okay. We're gonna, because the room is kind of big, if anyone has questions, I'm just gonna ask that you. Awesome. Come up to this mic here, because we're recording.
And they want to hear.
And they want to hear it on the recording too. Anyone? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. As a person of color, as a queer person, wanting to enter into this industry, I currently work in tech and definitely don't want to be there anymore for
Fair.
a lot of reasons. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that game design is something that I love and something that I really want to do. Currently work on my own stuff, but what advice would either of you give for someone like me who's trying to enter into the industry or somehow? Also, thank you for holding this panel. This is like the one panel that I wanted to come and see
Yay.
Of the entire con, this was the one I had to
Thank
wake up for, you know?
I'm so happy to hear that.
I'm glad, because it's 10 a.m. and like, oh, I appreciate you. I would give 2 pieces of advice there. Number 1 is get in where you can, like even if it's just like volunteering for a weekend, that's just it. Like I did that thing with Cryptozoic, and all I really did was play a party game with people that I thought would like it, and that got me my foot in the door and at least started me networking with those people. And then the second piece was, oh God, I lost my train of thought. It was so good. So good. You give your advice and it'll come back to me.
Okay. So I always say that I have a certain number of things to say and I have more, so I'm not going to say. I'm just going to talk. The first thing I would say is be as honest with yourself about who you are in making your game, because you will always regret taking part of yourself away when making the game. You can always tailor your game to your audience later. But right now, your game is for you, and don't ever feel like you have to take this out because it's too colored, or it's too queer, or it's too anything. Your game is yours, and don't ever feel like you have to change it for anybody. The other thing I would say is, depending on where you are and what stage of game development, you want as many people playing your game as possible. So, show it to friends, however raw it may be. Show it to friends. There are a few cons out there that embrace gameplay testing. One of them that's really good, it's on the East Coast, Metatopia, is a great con for showing off your game, although you may want it to be a little more finished and polished before you bring it. It's not, but that's what that con is for showing off your game to people that are passionate about games, love playing lots of different games, and you can get really good, honest, but not brutally honest feedback, because brutally honest feedback is not kind feedback. The brutality is never kind. So, and you want people that are going to evaluate your game for what it is, and help you get it to where you want it to be. So I don't know if there's anything, because I'm on the East Coast, so I don't know what's out here that's similar to Metatopia. But look for cons that allow for playtest areas, allow for demo areas, once your game is at that level.
There's Playtest Northwest. I would recommend at least checking that out, but I have heard feedback from other folks, even though like I love Playtest Northwest, that basically you're gonna have to be a player and a game designer and like build a mutually helpful relationship with other game designers in the area if you want them playtesting your games and giving you honest feedback. But my other piece of advice that I just remembered is like, just get started and produce what you can, and just go for it. I made a board game once, and it was very fun, and I had 2 publishers play it and immediately make me offers on the game. And then I took my game to Eric Lang, and I said, Eric, will you play this and give me feedback? And his feedback was basically, okay, what are you hoping to accomplish with this, he asked me. And I said, well, I want my name on a box because I feel like there's very few women on boxes, which this was 2014, so it was very few women on boxes. And on top of that, there were very, very few people of color. And he said, okay, well, if you want to have your name on this box, you can publish it with whoever. You're not going to make any money. And he goes, but if you want to make it simpler and more accessible and easy for other people to play, then you can make a lot of money, but your name's not going to be on the box. And that was soul crushing enough for me to like literally shelf it forever. I was like, I can't get what I want out of this. And I just said, okay, well, I still have not decided what to do with that game. It has been 6 years, and I don't regret it. I did it, and I shelved it, and I still love that game, and it has a special place in my heart, and I never published it, and I'm okay with that. And so even though I didn't get anything that I wanted out of that, it was worth the experience, and it's worth it for me to say like, hey, you know what? I tried, and I failed, and that's okay, because me getting what I wanted out of that was more important than actually building a successful product.
The one other thing I would say is do your best to build a community around you of people that are going to be on your side. That's general, advice for any creative. You want people on your side, who are there for you more than they're there for the game, if that makes any sense. Because people who are on your side are going to help you clarify your vision. They're going to help you make decisions like that in terms of what is most important to you, not what's most important to the success of the game.
Right.
And you know, if the game is a success, yay. But you've got to be able to live with the decisions that you make, whether the game is a success or not. And so you want people around you that are going to support you, that are going to cheerlead for you, they're going to, you know, help pick you up when you fall down, they're going to help clap when you get awards. You want people around you that are on your team. That's just general life stuff, not just for the game, but especially for game design.
If you're local, I'll be on your team.
Okay.
Thank you.
No.
How do you go about building a community? So you mentioned going into playtesting, and that's the one thing that I'm trying to do. So when I entered into this project, I'm doing all the art, all the design. I know how to do all that stuff. Actually being able to make money on this and make a living off of it is the one thing I have no clue about.
Right.
Yeah, how do you go about that? Because like I've been trying to find someone who is more like me and who is a designer or in some capacity in the game industry who's not video games, you know?
Right.
Doesn't do art for video games.
Are you hoping to self-publish or publish with a publisher?
I don't really know. I'm kind of thinking self-publishing at this point because
Like Kickstarter?
perhaps.
Okay. As somebody who's run multiple Kickstarters, I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. It's a nightmare, especially as like a single person or even a 2 or 3 person team. My first big project with B-World Games was with the Sonic the Hedgehog license. And they approached me like the literal day I lost my job. Within 3 hours, they were like, "We want you on this project." And I was like, "You want me to work with the Sonic the Hedgehog license?" And they were like, "Yeah." And oh my God, I was not prepared to work with like a huge license right out of the gate. And that was definitely a different experience. I will say, like, bless the Sonic the Hedgehog community. They are so kind and positive and nice to me. And I was like, wow, I wasn't expecting this. But even with them being kind, like even with 0 backers mad, the amount of information that's being thrown at you 24 hours a day, like people literally expect you to be on the entire time, like 24 hours a day. If you are not awake, you need to have somebody on the other side of the world that is awake to answer those questions. That's why I don't recommend running a Kickstarter alone. I would recommend, getting your game to where you want it. I would even say don't spend a ton of time on the artwork right now, and don't spend a ton of time on the graphic design. Pitch it to publishers, see if anybody's interested, and then once you start generating revenue from your first game being published with an established game publisher, then consider taking a step out into doing your own thing. Because even though you'll make more money, like you will literally run yourself ragged, burn yourself out so quickly if you run your own Kickstarter.
Yeah, I would agree in particular about not spending too much time on the art for the initial run through.
Because they're going to have their own vision if you pitch it to a publisher.
Yeah, but even when you're just talking about like your playtest versions, you might, let's say it's a card game, right? And you might decide these 6 cards aren't going to be in the game, because they didn't work. You streamlined the game, these cards, and that's your favorite art. You don't want to be tied to making decisions based on how much work you put into it, rather than what's going to be best for you and best for the game. You want to get to a playable version of the game. That way you can show it to people and kind of tighten up the design.
Also figure out your price point to begin with. The biggest thing that I've run into with people is with Kickstarter campaigns. If they start by running a small campaign where they're like, okay, I'm hoping to hit like 250 backers and it's a $10 game. If you start that way, you build a mailing list, you build a marketing list, you start building community around your game. And then you can use that to kind of like bounce off into your next project. And that is a really good way to establish yourself in the industry and start making a name for yourself. But if you start with like an $80 like miniatures board game, you're gonna fail. Like you're gonna screw up shipping internationally, or you're going to do something like catastrophic that could put your company like way into the red. And honestly, you'll probably still lose money on your first project just because there are so many things that can go wrong. So start small. Start as small as you possibly can. If it's a micro game with 10 cards, like start there. But don't immediately jump into this big project. I would say, even if you have the big project on the horizon, make a timeline, set goals for yourself, but start small.
Okay, thanks for your question. Okay. Anyone else? No one at all?
Well, it's almost 11.
We got time. Anything else you want to share? Anything else you want to say?
Do lots of research into where your price point's going to be, and make sure that your manufacturing process leaves you margin, because if you plan on selling into distribution at all, they're going to want like 60% off of MSRP, and there's like no margin there, because I worked in distribution for many years, and it's you need to account for that, and most people don't, because storing games in your house sucks, and storing games paying for storage is even worse.
You're paying rent twice.
Yeah, don't do it.
Oh,
Hi, sorry.
it's okay.
I have a lot of questions. As a person of color, how do you guys, can you speak about how you self-market a little bit, or how you present yourself to the public in this industry?
You want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
You should go first, because I'm not normal on that
Okay,
front.
so because I've been at this for so long, I don't anymore. But part of that has to do with where I'm at in terms of my financial situation. I have a very particular set of skills. I'm a writer. I can write anything if I choose to, but I don't need to run around a convention for 4 days and beg people for work that isn't going to be fulfilling and isn't going to pay me enough. And so I've passed that point in my career, thank God. But it's also because personally, that's not what I use to put food on the table. Different people have different ways that they have to approach things. Everybody's got a different life. Everybody's got a different family situation. Everybody's got a different financial situation. I consider myself incredibly lucky to be in a stable job with a pension and healthcare, that I don't have to worry about these kinds of things. And so I can kind of pick the project. Once I get an offer, I can pick the projects that I want. But at this point in my career, it's me walking up to someone like Nicole and saying, "Hey, you guys haven't given me work in a while. I want work." And then she'll talk to her people and not give me work. But that's because I've established those relationships. When you're first starting out, you need to be as professional as you can. Have your business cards ready. Have a website showing off your credits and what you've done. Find out where the ins are in the particular type of work you want to do. So if it's writing, you have to know where are the markets that are hiring. If you're doing Dungeons and Dragons type work, there's the Dungeon Masters Guild. But if you want to write for Pathfinder, right now there's really no in, because there's no market to get in. You can publish your own stuff on like DriveThruRPG
Or Patreon.
Yeah, but you need to know what the market looks like. You need to know where it is that you can establish credits, where it is that you can make a little money. Until you get a big contract, you're not going to make money except directly from people buying your stuff from you. Mm-hmm. And so there's lots of different places to sell directly to your customers. DriveThruRPG, DriveThruCards.
Twitter.
There's OnlyFans. There's lots of different things. It depends on what you're selling. Depends on what you're designing and what you're selling. Patreon is really big. Patreon unfortunately doesn't allow you to advertise to your friends on Facebook, because their algorithm is specifically set up to discourage Patreon links from getting to people. So that becomes more difficult. But I can't speak to your particular situation because I don't know your particular situation. I don't know. Do you have any credits? I don't know what it is you want to do. What it is you don't want to do. Do you just want to do card stuff and not board stuff? Do you want to do board stuff and card stuff but not RPG stuff? And so, because all those things have their own quirks and their own leaders of market, and some things you can do on your own, some things you can't do on your own. $80 to $100 boxed board games or really expensive to put together. And you know, I walk past every Gen Con every year, there's a couple of vendors that have like the cards and stuff, the components, and you know, you can talk to them about price points and stuff, but you don't have the apparatus to do that as a solo person. Nobody does. That just figuring out the components is weeks of work.
I'd be happy to talk to you about this, though, if you like want to tell me more about your idea and how to proceed. I also work with board game manufacturers, so like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. If you just like email Long Pack Games, they'll just like give you a quote on whatever you're hoping to make, and like you can start to get an idea for that. It's also okay to like literally ask questions, but just don't ask questions to your competitors. Just go directly to like the manufacturer and like ask them the questions that you want answers to, and they'll give you the information. It's really like out there. You just have to be brave enough to ask for it.
And that I think is I'm glad you used that word, competitors. In this industry, your colleagues are your competitors.
It's weird.
It's weird. Because you're fighting for the same dollars, whether they're freelance dollars or they're consumer dollars, you're fighting for the same dollars. Now, you're not really fighting. You know, we want everybody to make all the money. But in the end, there's a limited amount of dollars in the industry to be had. And so, you know, you can be friendly and you can be collegial, you know, you can be BFFs. But in the end, you might be competing with someone that you care about for that same gig, for that same sale.
And you might have feelings about it too.
Right. And be aware of that, because, you know, there have been times where I didn't get a project and one of my very close friends did get that project.
Get a therapist, a good one. That's my advice.
Yeah.
Like,
and I think Bebo's right. I think therapy is a useful tool. But be prepared to sometimes have hurt feelings, is my point, you know, and that doesn't mean any of it's personal. There's too much and too little at stake for it to be personal.
Yeah, I definitely had a situation where like I was working with the company, they hired me to do a how to play video, and then they were like, okay, cool, well, like now that the real game's out, we want you to update it. And I was like, okay, cool, yeah, I can do that. And then I like went back to them and I was like, hey, are we gonna update that video? And they were like, no, actually we hired your friend to just go a completely different direction. And I was like, I have very intense feelings about this. And it was that insecurity thing that I was telling you again, that like, you know, like, oh, this person has better equipment than me. This person had access to education that I didn't have access to. You know, like I was just like, this person has more privilege than me. And I like had a ton of feelings about it. And I had to really work through those, and it sucked. It was not a fun experience for me at all. And I even talked to the person directly and was like, so how much more work that like I'm working on are you gonna like what's your work capacity? Because if you're gonna be like continually taking the work that I'm expecting to be getting, like I need to figure out some other kind of work. And they were like, oh no, I actually like I'm at capacity, and so like you don't need to worry about that. And I was like, cool. Don't poach more of my customers, bro. Like, I had feelings, like really, really strong emotional feelings. And I
don't think you're wrong.
It's hard to be honest about those kinds of things. And that's just it, to answer your original question. I present myself as somebody who's super honest about everything. You know, I live an alternative lifestyle, and I want to be representative of my community in a positive but honest way, because I feel like so much of the internet is like selling this image, and I'm like, yeah, here's me all made up with my like nice hair and my fancy dress, and like also look at this ugly zit on my forehead, like and so just figuring out what you want your brand pillars to be, I think is super important, especially on Twitter, Instagram, wherever you're advertising your personal brand. Figure out what those 5 things you really want to represent yourself as. Mine's like board games and Heelys and honesty and polyamory and like gayness. So like these 5 things that I'm just like, these things are what makes me up, right? Mm-hmm. And I just focus on those things, but I also ask myself one really, really important question before I hit send on any tweet is, can I make this tweet relatable to more people? And so if I was gonna say board games and I want answers about just board games, I'll say board games. But if I want to produce a tweet that's gonna get more reaction, I'll say games. That way people can, it's open for interpretation, RPGs, tabletop games, video games, whatever, right? And I have to make a conscious decision every single day before I hit send, which is, can I make this more relatable to more people? That way I get more interaction and I reach more people, because that's how you grow your brand.
The one other thing I want to say, and this is not specifically related to your question, I want to say it before we run out of time, is that as a person of color, I found myself in a lot of situations where if I've had to say something about treatment of groups that I'm not a part of, in part I think because I've been on the other side of that, and in part I think it's because of my privileged position. But I want to use an example with stripping out identities here. I was hired for a project, and I had a meeting at Gen Con with the publisher that I was working with, and there were a couple of, well, the developer for the publisher, and there were a couple of people that weren't at the meeting, but I knew what their names were. And at the end of the meeting, I went up to the developer and I said, hey, it doesn't look like there's any women on this project at all. And, this isn't like, we're not talking about, all male robots here. There are people there. Why are there no women? And he kind of looked at me and went, He couldn't give me an answer. And I know why he couldn't give me an answer now. And that's non-disclosure. I can't say why. It still annoys me, but I can't say why. But there are going to be times where you have to have an uncomfortable conversation about how someone is being treated. And that may be you, and it may be a group that you're a part of, it may be a group that you're not a part of. But the gig is not worth your humanity. It's never worth your humanity. I mean, unless you need that gig specifically to eat. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do to feed your family, and that's I don't judge anybody for the decisions they have to make in those situations. But I'm not in that situation when I'm designing, so I get to have a big mouth, and that's another element of my privilege, is that I get to say what's on my mind a lot of times, and they're not comfortable conversations to have, but I'm in a position where I can make things better for someone else, even a little bit, and even if it's not on this project, it's something to make sure that they think about for the next project. To make sure that inclusion is better. You have to
move the needle, and that to do that you have to make noise.
Yeah.
But also I recommend bath bombs and a bath tray, because some of those days are going to be really hard, and the best way to reset is a bath.
Yeah, you do feel dirty after some of those conversations.
Yeah, it feels like watching an episode of Black Mirror when you have to do a diversity consult, and you're like, you made 10 different races of brown people into one tribe. Do you not see the problem?
And none of them speak that language.
No.
Yeah.
I've had some nightmare situations, but I still love the people that were attempting. An attempt was made, and then it was fixed.
Thank God. So we got about 3 minutes if anyone else wants to say anything and ask anything. If not, we'll wrap up and say thank you for coming. Thanks everyone for being here and for staying the whole time. And I hope you enjoy the rest of OrcaCon. We really appreciate you coming. Thank you.